Hello and welcome to Heck Knows, and today I know about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In this three-part series, I'll be ranking all 27 MCU movies starting right now with Part 1. It's the worst films, numbers 27 through 20. Let's get into it. Kicking off the list, number 27, the worst film in the MCU for me is The Eternals. Whether you like the movies or not, you gotta give Marvel a little credit for their consistency. You'd expect that from 27 movies there would for sure be some failures, but even their less successful films aren't full-on disasters. That being said, The Eternals for me is the closest thing to a failure that Marvel has put out in this cinematic universe. I think I wasn't alone in not knowing anything about The Eternals before the movie was announced, and even after looking into them and doing some extensive research, I just found myself struggling to get excited at all about this movie. There was a small glimmer of hype when the cast and director were revealed, like wow, they got Chloe Zhao to direct this? Angelina Jolie's in it? Brian Tyree Henry from Atlanta? That creepy kid from The Killing of a Sacred Deer? But then after seeing trailers, I had this apathy about the whole thing, and that feeling carried over as I was watching the actual movie as well. I just didn't care. Besides a couple good secondary performances from the likes of Barry Keoghan and Don Lee, I found the acting to be wooden at times, especially from Richard Madden, and really weird at others, especially from Angelina Jolie. And I couldn't tell if it was because I wasn't connecting emotionally to the characters in the story, or because they were poorly written. I don't know, it just wasn't clicking for me, and I honestly struggled to make it through the whole movie. The first half is quite bad in my opinion, really poorly paced, before it eventually turns into the standard visual effects brawl conclusion that Marvel films always do, but there was something off about this one. The thing about Marvel movies is yes, they do often take place on Earth and reference current and past events in pop culture, but then the rest is fantastical and fictional. Then we have The Eternals, which instead of presenting an alternate reality history, it inserts itself into real historical moments like the atomic bomb at Hiroshima, and it just feels wrong and actually kind of insensitive. I think this movie is the worst of them all because it made me actually concerned about the future of the MCU. I kind of lost hope a little bit. Even the post-credit stinger just left me feeling empty and wondering like, am I supposed to be excited about this? Up next, at number 26, I have Thor: The Dark World, and this is the second closest thing to a failure that Marvel has put out just because of how forgettable it is. They brought in the director of a few great Game of Thrones episodes to try and bring some epicness to Thor, but the end result is extremely dull. I mean, I had to go back and watch the trailer again just to remind myself of what the villain even looked like. Tom Hiddleston is actually the only bright spot in this one as he menaces Thor at every opportunity and brings some humor and levity to it, but otherwise this is a movie that takes itself way too seriously and probably made the producers realize that they had to take a new direction with Thor and lighten up the tone a little bit, but we'll get to that later. At number 25, I have The Incredible Hulk, which is not completely awful but still a misfire from Marvel here. This one was supposed to continue to fuel the hype after the immense success of the first Iron Man movie, but unfortunately, it was just so average that it kind of disappears along with Edward Norton as the Hulk, and definitely feels like the black sheep of all the movies. One of the downsides of the MCU is that they are a business. They have a formula, a winning recipe that they use for most of their movies that allows them to capitalize on as many viewers as possible. You can't fault them for that, that's the name of the game, right? But if you eat the same meal 27 times, you start to get tired of the taste, so you gotta change it up a little bit. Add some sauce or some spice to make that recipe tasty again. Unfortunately, there are a few Marvel movies that just stick to the basic recipe a little too closely and end up being rather bland, and Ant-Man the Wasp is one of those. Despite having charisma galore from Paul Rudd and a shocking amount of acting talent, this one just doesn't do enough to stick out from the pack in my opinion, which is why I have it at number 24. At number 23, I have Captain Marvel. In the same way that Superman is one of my least favorite DC heroes, Captain Marvel just isn't very interesting to me as a character because she's just too good. I also don't really understand the extent of her powers, and that's a problem because of how distinct all the other MCU heroes' capabilities are. When it comes to the actual movie, I found it to be a fine but somewhat boring origin story with the occasional interesting visual. Unfortunately, Brie Larson's Carol Danvers just isn't that compelling, and this is a problem because she is outshined in her own movie by a de-aged Samuel L. Jackson and an oddball Ben Mendelsohn villain. Heck, even the cat in the movie is more interesting, so hopefully they figure out what to do with this character in future films, because right now she kind of sticks out as the weakest character despite being one of the strongest Avengers. I've got the first Thor movie at number 22 because it just isn't quite my jam. Kenneth Branagh is an amazing stage theater actor turned actor-director, but I found that his directing this one felt too much like a literal space opera. Even the costumes just feel too polished and theatrical, and it took away from the immersion for me. Asgard just looks a little too staged. There is some humor from Kat Dennings and from Thor's fish out of water antics on Earth, and Chris Hemsworth is an undeniably good Thor. I mean, his physical acting and presence are for sure there. Him and Natalie Portman do have some chemistry as well, but the action in the story just don't really do it for me, and that's why I have it so low on my list. Number 21, I have Avengers Age of Ultron. As a whole, this movie is overstuffed and doesn't quite work, but there are some solid moments within it and hints of a better movie throughout that end up feeling like wasted potential. For example, what if the Maximoff twins were the main villains, with Pietro being the muscle to the more important Wanda, and they leaned into the more psychological horror aspect of the movie as Wanda messes with the Avengers' minds and shows them their greatest fears that they all have to overcome separately. That could be a really fun movie on its own, but ends up only being a small segment in the actual film. They obviously would never go full-on horror Avengers movie, but it'd be a lot cooler if you did. Another option would be to not have the Maximoff twins in this movie at all and have a more focused Ultron movie, because James Spader's Ultron was actually a lot of fun and definitely powerful enough on his own to be a solo villain. I think that the inventor versus his creation and the sort of father-son dynamic between Ultron and Tony Stark was a highlight of the movie, and a deeper exploration of that theme could have been more interesting than what we got. Anyways, definitely the weakest Avengers film, but at least we got the introduction of Vision and a pretty cool Hulkbuster fight sequence. And finally, at number 20, I have Black Widow. It took Marvel 20 movies before they made a female-led movie with Captain Marvel, and then the only other one they've done is Black Widow, which they made after the character had already died in the MCU, and that's pretty shady. Despite the weird and overdue timing of her solo movie though, I thought this one worked as a kind of rogue spy movie with a memorable performance from Florence Pugh, but overall it's one of the weaker films and feels too inconsequential in the grand scheme of things to make it higher on this list. Well, that does it for part 1. What do you think? Was I too harsh on some of these movies? Maybe not harsh enough? Let me know in the comments and stay tuned for the next episode as we find out which films are good but not quite good enough to crack my top 10. Until then, thanks for watching. Take care.